You're about to listen to an archived episode of The Night Shift with Zeno Horoman. This is brought to you commercial-free by the Surfcast Podcast. If you're interested in more historical, educational, and entertaining surf fishing content, check out weekly episodes of the Surfcast Podcast available today on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts, including www.surfcastpodcast.com.
Today is my pleasure to have Steve Campo on our podcast. Many of us consider Steve to be one of the best surfcasters of our generation, responsible in part for many innovation we use in our sport today, never mind all the big fish that he has landed over the years. Steve, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Zeno.
All right, so I want to know, for someone who's so well-known and well-respected, how did you start into fishing? Were there somebody who helped you along the way? Were there somebody who took interest and influenced you?
Well, not really. In first grade, when I was in first grade, my family moved from Rego Park, Queens to Bayside, Queens, and they were just building the Long Island Expressway at that time, and that put me about 5 miles away from saltwater, being Little Neck Bay. And I just found my way down there on my bicycle, and that was the beginning of the end. I was down there every single day and often many nights, and I just met a few people, and I just kept fishing.
Wow, that's interesting. You would assume that someone who has been in fishing as much as you had all these people that guide you, but you're basically a self-taught guy.
Well, I did meet a lot. I did meet a lot of people being older, and the people being older, and I guess they took pity on me and they pointed me in the right direction, and that's all you need.
Yeah, that's true. I know when we spoke before, you said that when you were younger, you read everything that you can get your hands on, and for a time you believed that, but then you came to your own conclusions as your career, or whatever you want to call it, this is what we do, came along, right?
That's exactly right. I still read everything I could read. I love to read. And it's just that in the very beginning, I was kind of afraid to break any of the rules that was set by people who have done what I've done, before me. And I just accepted everything I read as gospel truth. But, as soon as I started realizing that my findings were quite different than many of the things I read by many great people, I started doubting myself. But then after a while, I just said, well, the people who wrote that, they're in a different pair of shoes than I'm in, and just have to do what works for you. And I'm of the firm belief that no matter what you do in fishing, everything works. Everything works, every lure works, every retrieve works, every color works, every time of the day or night works. It's just what works best. That's all.
So would you credit yourself or your success to actually paying attention to detail and try to maximize your success? Because if everything works at all time, then I guess some would say, well, what's the difference? You don't have to worry about anything. You'll be somewhat successful. Did you want it to be super successful? Is the attention to detail part of that?
Well, my attention to detail was, if I'm going to spend 1 hour fishing, do I want to catch no fish or do I want to catch fish? So it just came down to maximizing my chances and seeing what the tiniest change made in the way you rig something to the final outcome. And like I said, anything works. A perfect example is a guy, his name's Jim Short, and he's the guy who brought Fluorescent Green to Block Island. And he's got a lot of big fish under his belt. One day I see him, and he shows me this bomber with 2 straightened out treble hooks. The thing was loaded solid with water. So I just felt that was a little strange. So the very next day, I take a bomber, I fill it solid with water, and I take it, and I start fishing it, casting it in the daytime. The thing has no action. It sinks like a stone, and I wouldn't make a single cast with it. So I just came to the conclusion that like I just earlier said, everything will work. So I just want to maximize. I wanted to maximize my chances of catching fish. So So I found that certain things, just for me, certain things work better than others. And that's just the direction I went. I didn't really care what worked best for you or anyone else. I cared what worked best for me, because I know that fishing is thought of as like a team sport, but it's not. It's an individual sport. When the sun comes up, you either caught fish or you didn't catch fish. That's all.
Right, there's a lot of truth to that. Right. Did your log came in as did your log help you a lot in maybe understanding the fisheries better, or the fish, or your success? Was that a big part of who you were?
Not really. The log is been very helpful. I still have all my logs. It's been very helpful for doing research, and it helped me remember a lot of nights that I otherwise would have totally forgotten. But as soon as I start reading about it, I remember. But every year is different. So just because I caught fish at a certain place at a certain time last year, the next year it may or may not be the same. And the only way to catch fish is having your line in the water.
Yeah, that's true. But, you've done stuff that I feel and we had this discussion before, your mind seemed to work different than most anglers, meaning you really get granular to the things that you see. But I don't think that you see them any different than anyone else. You just see them and other people don't. Like, for example, the hook sharpening part. I mean, you had this... You told me you never made more than 3 casts in your life that you didn't sharpen your hooks? Do you find it strange that most people don't do this? I guess that's my question.
Well, what I believe I said was I didn't ever make more than 2 or 3 casts without checking the sharpness of my hooks.
Right.
So, but I mean, just from making casts and your plug hitting the water, the hooks are going to get a little dull. And I just found it mind-boggling to see other people not sharpen the hooks. Because what happens? You make a cast and you lose a fish with your dull hooks, and the first thing you're going to do is sharpen them at the end of the cast. So why not have them sharp to begin with and catch that fish? So I just, certain things that to me were just common sense, other people, I guess, just they didn't prioritize things the same. Like I never made a cast with a compromised leader. I never made a cast with any tackle that if I would have hooked like a really big fish, that I'd be worrying about whether I was going to land it because of a deficiency in the tackle. So I just take everything that was in my control and I controlled it. And the aspects that are not in my control, there's nothing you could do about it. So why not control what you can control, and the rest is really out of your hands.
You told me that you went through multiple spools of line each night. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I never well, back then everyone was fishing mono,
right,
on spin. So I fished Andy like many people did. That was my line of choice. But to have one spool of line to me was ridiculous. Even in a Cape, I carried 2 spools. I carried a heavier pound test and a lighter pound test. But at spots like Montauk or Block or something where you're not right next to your vehicle, what do? You walk down the beach. I've seen guys walk down the beach with the plug that's on their rod. Now they get a half mile away from their vehicle and they lose that plug. Now they can't even make another cast. So now they got to walk all the way back. So I would often go through half a dozen spools a night. Was not a lot, because as soon as I felt my line touch anything, that's whether I had a fish on or not, that spool was coming off. There was no way I was going to use that spool for another cast. So it didn't bother me to take 1 second to change the spool of line. It doesn't take long to do. You're going to end up doing it when you lose the fish on the next cast anyway. So again, why not do it when it's in your control on your terms? You do it on your terms.
I guess most people will say, well, why not just cut back on your line and keep fishing? At least that's my experience, what most people would think.
Well, I would also cut back. I mean, I would cut back if you're talking about 10 or 15 feet, but I'm not going to. When you cut back, it does a lot of things. It affects your drag setting. It affects your distance. It affects how much line is being put around the spool per turn of the handle. It affects a lot of things. So I always wanted my tackle to be, a 999 on the scale of as perfect as it could possibly be. And I really can't say I remember ever having many tackle mishaps of any kind. It was not my way. I mean, I've seen so many people in blitzes. I've seen people in the bathroom in Montauk filling up spools of line and the quarter-pound spools rolling around in the bathroom. Everything's getting twisted up. They're doing it on the beach in the middle of a blitz. I'm just like mind-boggled that that's the way certain people do things. But, different strokes for different folks.
That is definitely true. I mean, what you seem to say is that you want to control your world to maximum ability. If you can control it, why not just control it?
Exactly. If it's in your control, why wouldn't you control it?
That's a good point. I can't argue with that, Steve. That's a good point. What was your feeling when a braid came out?
When braid came out?
Yeah.
Well, I fished with braid on conventional. I fished with nylon squidding line, and then I went to Dacron line, and then I went to Micron line. And the Micron and the Dacron are hollow core, so you could splice them back together. But I stopped fishing when about the time that modern braids that are used on spinning tackle, came into play. It was a non-issue for me. So
gotcha.
It didn't affect my fishing at all.
You guys did you use the lines that we're talking about when you were fishing breezy with conventional? Is that what you used then?
Yeah, breezy and other places. Yep.
Right. Now, tell me, speaking of breezy, and you told me that anus thing with figuring out what the fish was eating, and I thought that was one of the most fascinating things that I heard. You remember?
Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to. One time when I got there, I saw a guy catch a fish. It was the daytime. I saw him catch a fish, and then I seen he took his thumb and his index finger, I guess, and right in front of the anus, he just kind of like put his hand from the anus to the mouth and forced up everything that was in the stomach right out the throat. He was able to see exactly what the fish was feeding on, and then he stuffed it right back down the throat because he was selling the fish, and that's part of the weight, that's part of the money, but at least he had a better idea of what the fish were feeding on. And I just thought that was a really slick thing to do. And I picked up that practice. You learn a lot from watching other people, whether it's things to do or things not to do. Everything is, like I said, I'm very black and white and very opinionated. It's either better or it's worse. So at the end of the day, was this a good move or was this a bad move? It's going to add fish or it's going to delete fish from my count. So that's how I made my decisions.
I mean, we should mention that when you fish, it was different generation and different way of looking at fisheries, and fishing sale was a normal thing that everybody does. And you guys were driven somewhat to that by competitive by nature, also selling fish. Some of the guys today don't understand that. I don't know why do you have to not respect what it was and appreciate what it was. I know I do. It was a totally different time. So I just want to make sure that people understand what we talk about, that the fishing and selling fish was a huge part of what you guys did.
It no doubt it was. It's just the way it was when it was done by those, before me. And that's just the way it was just a natural progression to take a sport that you really enjoyed. It was a hobby. And be able to recoup some of your investment on it. And that's just the way it was. And no one really gave it any thought for many years. Some of the amounts of fish I've seen in people's boats and trucks, no one would believe it. But that's just the way it was.
When we back to breezy, I just got a question on a metal lip swimmers, and especially on a diving ones. There seems to be last few years this rebirth of diving metal lips, and I kind of feel that a lot of people are not understanding what exactly that they try to accomplish with them, other than they just sink. What's your feeling on deep diving plugs of metal lip type?
Well, I used a lot of deep diving metal lips. I don't feel that some plugs that are touted as deep diving plugs really are. For instance, lately there's been a lot of things online about trolling plugs. And in my explanation, I can say I'm only familiar with 3 trolling plugs: Donnie's, Danny's, and Gibbs.
Right.
Now, all these new builders, I can't say. So everything I'm saying has nothing to do with that.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not talking about. I only brought that up only because of current popularity. I'm mostly interested of your experience, doing this.
Well, to me, a trolling plug is not a deep diving plug. All the trolling plugs that I use were made out of light woods. They really didn't go deep. In my opinion, they were called trolling plugs just because of the profile of the plug allowed it to be trolled, usually on wire or some other means, at faster speeds than most people retrieve that. And they're great plugs around jetties for sure. But I think that a lot of people, they just look at the paint and they don't look anywhere past the paint. The paint I never looked at. Who cares about the paint I have? I could buy paint. I can make it any color I want.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that, but I mean, if anyone was as obsessive about color more than you got to point the guy out to me, because you have definitely had your feelings on the colors, no?
Well, certain colors just do have a tendency to work better in certain places. So, of course, those are the colors that most people are going to use. But it's like the example I think I've made in an earlier discussion with you about color was, for instance, yellow is like a super popular color in Montauk. So if I go to Montauk and there's 10 guys in a lineup, it's pitch black out, there's 10 guys in a lineup, no one's rods are bent over, no one's catching anything, everyone's just, talking with each other. You could tell nothing's happening. Why would I put on a yellow darter when I know that 7 out of 10 guys already have a yellow darter on? I'm going to put on the most unyellow plug I can. That's not a darter. I'm just going to try exactly the opposite of what's not working to try to find what is working.
But you also had a lot of plugs that were very specific and slightly changes, these rainbow plugs, or the plugs that, can you at least tell me why did you want plugs painted certain way? There has to be a reason behind every one of them, I assume, no?
Well, when I started fishing at Breezy and I met Danny in 1976, most of the plugs that Danny painted, he painted for the gang at Breezy, and he had all the good colors. Certain colors just didn't really seem to do that great over there, and certain colors took more than their share of fish. So it was just a matter of that. As far as the rainbow specifically, I mean, that was a creek chub color going back, I don't know how long, the 40s to 50s, I don't know. That was just an old color. But it definitely had its days where, even though Danny used the same color blue as he did in his mullet swimmers for the back, sometimes the rainbow plugs just worked better. So I really wasn't questioning why they were working better. It's just that they were working better, so you use what's working the best. Like I said, everything is going to work. But when you have a half a dozen guys in one spot, it's very easy to see what's working better than what's not working. It's quite obvious. If someone's rod is bending and yours isn't, well, he's doing something that you're not doing, or he's doing it in a different manner than you're doing it. So you have to just learn what you're doing wrong or what you're doing right.
Do you have, like most people, a special color that is your kind of, like people call it, go-to plug, or is it just depending on situation, structure, and place that you're actually going to give a lot of thought what you're actually going to take it out of your bag and throw first?
No, I have probably a half a dozen colors that I fished, and basically any of those colors morphed into other more, let's say, specific type colors. But it was basically the same color plugs in the same places, gave me the same results. I mean, it was all about basics: white and black, yellow, blue, and then after fluorescent green and yellow and things like that. I really don't think that color plays all that important a role. I think that quite often people make the assumption when they throw on that yellow darter that the fish are hitting yellow darters. The fish are hitting yellow darters because that's what you're throwing. They may be hitting anything. They may not. It's only one way to find out. So when you're fishing with a handful of people, it's a lot easier to kind of go through the drill and figure it out, because you have 5 or 6 guys figuring it out. It gets figured out 5 or 6 times faster. And sometimes with people you don't even know are figuring it out for you, but they don't know they're figuring it out for you. So you just have to learn what to do and what not to do, and when to do it and when not to do it. It's just nothing more than that.
So nothing more than being observant when you say that other people are kind of telling you what to do or not to do. Is that what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, if you're in a lineup and these guys I never fished bails and I never fished any clickers in my drag or anything like that. But yeah, so many times guys, I won't be catching fish. There'll be a guy with a bail catching fish. And all you have to do is count how many seconds until that bail flips over. Then you're either casting too far, you're casting too close. You're doing something different than he's not doing. And often people are more than happy to put their lights on and show you everything. I find the new generation where everyone opens up their plug bag and shows everyone online what they use. I just can't relate to that, because no one would do that back when I was fishing. Like, what's in my bag? If someone tried to look in your bag, you would probably end up getting your fingers broken. It was just a different mindset, I guess.
Listen, I can appreciate it. And I honestly don't look any in a bad or good way. I just think it's different times, and I kind of agree with you. But the one statement that you just said, which is, I think, exactly the way I perceive your attention to detail, is that counting someone's seconds, how much lines went off somebody's reel to figure out where is he casting. It's a brilliant and yet such a simple things that most people just don't either think about it, or they're just not aware of it, to be honest with you.
Well, you think about it, desperate times calls for desperate measures. If someone else is catching fish and you are not, the fish are there. So therefore you're being deficient in some manner. So what else are you going to do? You can't go grab the guy and go look at what he's using or something like that. He's probably going to show you anyway with his flashlight. So you have to figure out what you're doing wrong. So if you're catching fish and I'm not, and I can't figure out why, well, when the sun comes up, I'm going to have no fish and you're going to have plenty. So you'll have a great day's sleep, and I'll probably not get much sleep at all.
Where did the fluorescent color came from? What is there a story behind it? I'm not suggesting a specific story, but I mean, there has to be a reason. It's such a weird looking plug for Northeast, because we don't really have that many fluorescent fish or bait.
The fluorescent green was brought to Block Island by Jim Short, and he told me that it was a really good color. And he was a salmon guide from upstate New York somewhere, and he painted his spoons this fluorescent green. And all you had to do was try it to see that he was onto something. He was very much onto it. So, of course, after that, I painted fluorescent everything. Fluorescent blue. I already used fluorescent pink in the Cape, and that was a great color up there. Fluorescent. I tried all the fluorescent colors. I tried phosphorescent colors. I tried everything. But really, when it came to the fluorescent colors for myself, the only colors that really seemed to make a difference were fluorescent green, fluorescent yellow, and fluorescent pink. The rest of the fluorescent colors really didn't seem to pan out for me, so I just didn't use them. I just used what worked.
What's your feeling on these dark nights, light nights, dark versus white plugs? Like, they seem to be like you said, it's probably one of those things that you have read when you were younger, and then you tried and you says, this is just bullshit. But, there seems to be this thing, like on a dark nights, you use dark plugs. On the white nights, light nights or moons, full moon, you use lighter plugs. Did you ever agree to that notion?
I kind of did, but what I always try to do is, let's say I start with an all black plug. If I don't catch anything on an all black plug, then I try an all white plug. I try to make everything divided like a pie into sections. All right, I go in opposite things. I tried black, didn't work. I tried white, didn't work. Then I'll go through and the other handful of colors that I mentioned, the blues and greens and things like that. And I just try to be as different from everything else, because the thing I was using previously didn't work. So why would I want to use another variation of fluorescent green type of thing? So I would just keep trying like very opposite things to each other. If a fast retrieve didn't work, I try a slow retrieve, then the medium retrieve. But I wasn't going to try, let's say, I wasn't going to try anything that was close to what previously just failed me. I was going to be in the opposite direction. Just like sometimes people will catch a fish by accident, or what they feel is an accident, meaning they caught a fish on when they weren't reeling in, or they caught a fish when they started reeling in very fast at the end of the retrieve, or something like that. You have to figure out, well, what triggered that fish to hit at that time. And it's after a while, you just get the same type of situations over and over and over. So you just keep repeating the previous successes over and over and over. And usually it'll just work again. The fish haven't changed. It's usually just, I think it's the technique just as much as the actual lure that will give you a success or a failure. So quite often, for instance, one of my favorite things is and this is something, again, I've been reading about it for 50 years. Oh, it's a bright night, fish tie direct and take your leader off, the fish will lead a shy. I just don't believe that. I don't even believe that for 1%. I don't believe that is why the fish, all of a sudden, when you took that leader off, you started catching fish. Because when you have a leader on, the plug is pivoting on the leader. When you now tie direct, the pivot is now gone and that knot is tight to the front of the plug. So that plug is not going to react the same way. So I believe that it's the change of the action of the plug going from having a leader to tying direct that triggered the strikes. I don't believe the fish could see the leader or could care less or understand it, because they've had how many years to know what a treble hook looks like. They don't seem to, that doesn't seem to bother them. So why do you think they could see the leader if they can't see the hook?
Listen, that's always been my argument, that you're going to take the leader off and they're going to hit a 9-inch piece of wood with 3 trebles underneath. I mean, that to me, it's just a silly argument. But, I think it's sometimes the shit that we actually put in our heads that we start believing.
Well, I guess I've had it kind of like beat into my head, because I fished with people who used crimp-on 60-pound wire leaders on the front of all their plugs. And I've seen these guys catch plenty of fish, full moon, new moon. It didn't matter. They just were good fishermen, and they fished the leader for whatever reason they wanted to fish the leader. And that's just the way it was. So, I mean, I'm saying to myself, look at that thing. It's got 2 feet of 60-pound wire in front, a swivel. It's got 2 fluoro hooks on the back. You could barely even tell what's in between all the hardware, and they're catching fish like crazy. So I don't think that's it. I do believe it's the pivot on the plug that's changed when you have a snap, or what they call a clip nowadays, a snap versus tie direct. And that's what I think it's always been. I think that's what it's always been for me, and people could believe whatever they want for themselves. But if you look at the original minnow plug, the Rapala, and you read their directions from Laurie Rapala, he said to use a loop on the front of the plug. That loop equals a pivot, just like a snap or a clip would give you. So that's why he said, in his opinion, he said to use it. So when other minnow swimmers came out afterwards, first they came out, they didn't have split rings, then they did have split rings, and it's to me, having a split ring on the nose and then putting a snap on it, and I know lots of people do it, but everything works. Like I said, it changes the action. And all you have to do is make one cast either way, one cast with the same exact plug, and you'll see that the action has been changed. But most people just won't even give it that little observation to see what that little minute change has made. But it's just one of my really strong opinions on things. That's all. And I know it's more than an opinion in my mind. That's all. When you believe something when you believe your opinion to be fact and treat it as such, again, at the end of the day, sure, I'm sure I lost plenty of times following my own belief on something, but I like to think that I gained more times than I lost. So as long as you end up with 51-49%, you're ahead of the game. It's like every little advantage helps.
It's very hard to argue with you when you were so successful that you shouldn't have a show called Steve Campo, My Opinion as Fact. And I'm saying that respectfully because you went through these experiences to such a detail and testing that, your opinion, although it will always just be an opinion, in my view, as someone who also fishes, it's a fact because no one has presented their facts as strongly as you have, if that makes any sense. Okay. But I know that you spent a lot of time testing your plugs, more than I know anyone that I've heard. How did you go about testing your plugs? Like, did you go like on a calm day in the back bay? I know that you didn't test in the middle of the blitz. That is definitely not your style.
No, everything works in a blitz. No, what I did was I used to take my plugs over towards a spot over by Little Neck Bay there. It's like a seawall at Crider's Point. And it was lit at night. And I would go there at night because I found I could see into the water better under the lights. And I would go there, I would bring my truck, I would bring hundreds of plugs, my triple beam balance scales, all my tackle, which is all my hooks and all my terminal things. And I would just make the slightest changes and make a half a dozen casts each way and see how the plug responded to see, well, I took that split ring off the front. Now look how different it swims, or I did this, or I did that. And like I said, everything is going to work. So you have to decide what you think is going to work the best. And for me, what worked the best is what caught the best. It wasn't, any secret formula or something like that. But I see these guys nowadays, they'll make the first plug and they'll spend 8 hours on this Rembrandt paint job and they don't even know what the plug's going to do. So for me, when I had a plug and I wanted to know what it did, is I would paint it white. I would put a Sharpie line, a black Sharpie line down the middle of the back, a red Sharpie line as like a lateral line on each side. I would just cast it out. I'd be able to see how much roll the plug had, how much zig, how much zag, how much everything, because those straight lines were very obvious when they were flashing how much roll, let's say, the plug had and things like that. So that's the way I did it. The paint job is just like the clothes you wear. It's just a dressing. You know what I mean? It's what's inside that really matters. What's outside is a matter of blue may work today where black may work tomorrow. But as long as I knew the plug was responding in the exact same manner, that was the most important thing. I didn't have, like I hear all these guys with lucky plugs. None of my plugs were lucky plugs. They were just duplicates of the same plugs that I used the night before. If I caught a fish on a fluorescent green redfin the night before, I didn't care if I had that plug in my bag the next night, as long as I had a fluorescent green redfin, because I knew it was going to respond identical to the other one. They were all the same to me. So, that's my opinion on it as far as swimming the plugs. And I also studied the plugs needlefish when we were coming up with some of the trophy tackle stuff. I was in the water with a scuba mask on, and I watched it for 2 or 3 hours probably. I was in the water, and I watched every brand of needlefish. I watched exactly what they did. I didn't understand them. I wanted to understand why they were so effective. And you really don't know what's going on until you're right next to that plug in the water and you see what's going on. And needlefish have tremendous action underwater, despite what many people seem to think. And they all respond differently to each other, like different brands and things like that. So it's a matter of matching the type of plug you're using to the conditions you're using them in.
I want to touch back on a trophy tackle story, but did you ever find that when you bought plugs, and especially I assume on wood, that they were not the same? Meaning, if you got a batch of, and whoever the builder was, you got a batch of certain plugs, that they wouldn't swim the same, that you literally had to go test them all and see which one's doing what, not so much on plastic? Or was actually the plastic also something that you tested every single plug just to make sure that, because, speaking with you, I got a feeling that you didn't allow Obama to make the decision for you.
No, I can honestly say that I never fished a single plug that I could remember, certainly never since I got a driver's license, the way it came from the factory or the builder. I never used anything the way that somebody else said, this is the way you should use it. I'll make up my own mind what I should use. And why? I mean, I always see these, what size hook should I use on an SP minnow type of things online. And I just shake my head. Who cares? I don't care what you think I should use. I don't care what anyone thinks I should use. I'll decide what I should use. I'll decide what works better for me. I'm the only one standing in my shoes, so who would know better than me?
True. I mean, you were one of the first guys to use the 4X hooks, right?
As far as I know.
And was there a particular reason why? Of course there is. I just want to know what it is.
A coffee can full of straightened 3-0s.
Aha.
That'll make you better. You see, well, that's what it comes down to, right?
I get it.
Well, what happened was, let's say, okay, the loaded redfin is a favorite topic. So what happened is with loaded redfins, I mean, I tried everything. You name it. I mean, my original load was mercury, because that's what was taught to me when I was probably 12 or even 11 years old. A retired German machinist showed me how he loaded Reinhardt Jinx plugs, which was one of the first plastic plugs that they used, how he would load those plugs. And that was a screw eye plug. So they would back out the screw eye and put the syringe inside and put in some mercury. So I didn't, at the time, I had no Reinhardt Jinxes, and they were long out of production, and they were really kind of a crummy plastic lure. I think they were Bakelite, and they were very brittle. But some of the first minnow swimmers, like Rebels and Garcia, used to sell something called a Mimi. It was made overseas somewhere. It was like a real potato chip, but they were dirt cheap for 19 and 29 cents each at Capitol in New York. So I had 1 million of them, and I just painted them any color I want, because the color selection was just 1 or 2 colors. And I started experimenting with the loads, and I started catching pretty good on the loads. I mean, they were tiny plugs. So then when everything came to redfins, I started noticing that the redfins were reacting differently with the same amount of load in. So I started looking into it a little deeper, and I started noticing that the redfins varied. They varied like crazy. They must have had many different molds, and they were made who knows what country.
So you're saying that the factory, the redfins that you got were in a box. Although they were all supposedly came from the same mold, they were different.
They were very different, and they were different not only by color. They were different as painted versus the chrome, because they were made out of 2 different plastics. So it's like comparing apples and oranges. They respond differently. They react differently. So they would treat it differently. So then you have to decide, well, how much weight do I want into this? And I always see the same thing. People are putting, 10 cc's is good. Well, 10 cc's is good. And so is 9, and so is 8, and so is 7, and so is 6. So for me, what I did was I started off by weighing every plug that I owned. Every plug, every redfin, no hooks, no hardware, nothing, just the bodies themselves. The variance in the plugs was ridiculous. It was unbelievable. So now I was faced with, well, do I put the same amount into plugs that are starting out weighing differently, or do I get them to all end up being the same weight? Meaning this redfin may take 2 grams of weight where the next one may take 4 grams of weight, but at the end of the day, they're going to weigh the same. Well, there is no right answer. It's, again, which way you think is better. And for me, I thought the better idea was to have everything end up weighing the same, no matter how they started off. Because if something weighed 1.25 ounces, I know how far I'm going to cast 1.25 ounces. Even if it has more or less weight in it, I feel it's closer to match 2 plugs like that weigh exactly the same than weigh 2 plugs that started off at a different weight and end up at a different weight. They're going to respond in the water differently. So I wanted everything just to be as much a duplicate as possible. So when I really got an awakening, when I started to weigh all these plugs and started realizing how much different they weighed from each other, then I started looking into other things. I started looking into, well, these plugs leak like sieves. Why do they leak like sieves? Okay. Some of them leak because the injection mold port was never sealed on the older redfins. Some of them leak because where the wire forms are put in, they just put a little skim coating of like the plastic flashing over it, and you don't see anything. But if you break it apart with an ice pick and break that flashing apart with an ice pick, and you start sealing it with super glue, not the way that everyone does it online, you'll start seeing that super glue starts sinking in deeper and deeper, and you may have to do it 4 or 5 times. And I filled mine from the inside out, not from the outside in. So I would put in the super glue, and then the next day the super glue, I couldn't see it anymore. Then I would fill it again, and again, you wouldn't see it the next day. And then the next day, then you would see it. And then slowly but surely, now it will be topped off with super glue. Now that super glue just reinforced with that plastic hanger is inside that plug, because all that glue could only seep down if air inside, if there was a void for the glue to go to. So now, instead of having a microscopic movement of the link inside of the plastic, and the link would just pop it apart like a peanut shell, now the super glue held it in pretty good. And I can honestly say, I don't think I ever had one link pulled apart after I glued them. So I think that people who are just sealing it from the top down, they're wasting their time, to tell you the truth. They're sealing it something that probably didn't need to be sealed in the first place. But it's just little details like that I think are very important. And now I guess that concept seems to have caught on, because a lot of other people seem to seal their plugs, or attempt to seal their plugs.
You are well known for painting a nose of your plugs. Most of your plugs that I've seen and that I own, you have little dabs of blue and green and yellow. And why did you do that? Explain that for people who might not know. Why did you do that?
Well, it started off before I loaded any plugs. It started off when I was probably about 10 or 12, very young. I was able to buy floating and sinking Rebels. And the sinking Rebels usually, but not always, were marked sinking on the lip. But they were in my bag. I couldn't really tell them apart. So I started by marking the very tail of the plug. The problem with that is I'd have to remove the plug to see whether it was the floater or the sinker. So I just started doing it under the lip, and I just used blue for floating and red for sinking. So it was very easy to tell. Then when I started loading, I just picked the color between blue and red, and that was yellow. So that's when I had only one load. Then I started experimenting with the multiple loads, and I do have a method for how I achieved my loads. But once I had more than yellow, I had to have other colors. So it's basically just primary colors, like blue, and then green, then yellow, then orange, and then red. So that's from the lightest to the heaviest. So I could tell immediately in my bag, I could tell exactly what I had. In certain plugs I had in like needlefish, I had the same plugs, seven different weights. Bombers 3, redfins 3. I mean, there was a lot. So I wasn't learning a lot of plugs. I was learning a very few plugs that were just weighted differently, but it was the same plug. So I thought it was very easy to go from, they would all have overlap. And like I said, everything works. Well, what works best? Well, I might start with like a medium load redfin, but maybe a light load would have been the better choice, or a heavier load. I'll know on one cast. And I it was no big deal to just go from weight to weight to weight. It was the same plug. So it's not like you're learning, well, how does this plug respond in the water, and how does that plug respond in the water? The plug responds in the water the same. It's the conditions that have changed. The plug's not changing.
Is there any particular conditions that would made you pack your bag with specific colors?
My bag basically never changed.
Really?
Many bags, but my bags all had the same plugs in them in the same colors. There were certain plugs that never came out of my bag, whether it was the new moon or the full moon. Then I had what I called the guest appearance plugs. Those are the ones that, the rotational plugs you try, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And when you're not doing it on the regular plugs, you try those plugs, the second tier plugs and things like that. But as far as packing, my bags were I always had multiples of everything in my bag. I carried all my extra plugs without hooks. I couldn't see why I would want to take the space up in my bag to have 2 black Gibbs needlefish next to each other. I can only cast one of them. So why do I need 2 next to each other taking up space? I could put another color of needlefish next to that black one and double my choices in colors, but I could have 2 or 3 extras of the black ones without hooks that fit in between the round compartments of the plug bag. That's why I did round instead of square. So now I could have, 30 plugs in a plug bag that only holds 12 plugs. But I don't have to worry about, I just lost my only black Gibbs needlefish, or I just lost this, or I just lost that, because I basically had everything in duplicate.
That's so fucking brilliant. I'm sorry, but that is just brilliant. I don't know why. Okay, so now I have to ask, how do you change your plugs on a rock in the middle of the night? I mean, how do you add hooks to your plugs?
It was the easiest thing. No one back then used to rely on flashlights that, from what I read,
light up half a jersey.
You know what I mean? I knew where every single plug was in my bag. For me to take off my black Gibbs and put on a black redfin, I didn't have to put on the light. I knew exactly where it was. I didn't need a light for anything. What do you need a light for?
Yeah, but wait a minute. You have plugs with no hooks. You have to add hooks to them.
I don't need a light to put hooks on my plugs. My hooks were all pre-sharpened in a waterproof container. All I have to do is put it on and squeeze it down with a pair of pliers.
So it was a split ring. There's split rings already attached?
If it was a plug that used split rings, like a redfin, the split rings were already attached. If it was a plug that I didn't use split rings on, like a needlefish, there were no split rings. But it never required a light to do so.
But if you use the plug that didn't require split rings, let's just say needlefish, right? You're talking to the swivel, so you used an open eye hook?
Yes, I used open eye hooks on everything above, let's say, 1/0s. Anything below 1/0s, I didn't really use any open eye style hooks. Those smaller sizes, usually the plugs they went on all had split rings on.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about the red light? I mean, you are one of the people credited with, coming up with the red light. That has something to do with crabs?
The red light idea, it just came. When I was a kid, in the back of the magazine, I think it was Sports Afield, they had this thing to get your own night crawlers or something. So, of course, I sent away for it. And yeah. I mean, I noticed when you use the red light on worms that they wouldn't go back into the burrows. You could walk right up to the worm. So in the Cape, where I was fishing a lot of eels, live eels, and up there it was really no problem because everyone would just take the eel, throw it in, and put it on, no problem. But when you had to put a light on to get the eels, let's say, out of the tank, the eels would go wild and everything like that. So I just basically took the worm idea and tried it on the light, and it was awesome. The eels, they never even changed at all. You could put the light on and it would be no different. They didn't start moving or anything, so you could have your way with it. And the red light was really good because I could face the water with the red light instead of turning my back to the water like I always did with a white light, where then everyone on the beach or in the lineup can see it. I could keep facing the way I was facing, use the red light. I could be changing the plug. No one else would even know that someone was changing the plug or doing anything else. And you just have a little more privacy.
I think the secretive nature of what you guys done in those days, not that it's not prevalent today, but it was totally different. At least the vibe that I get from what you guys were doing. I mean, I would literally say that you guys walked in the shadows.
Well, actually, that's quite literal. I learned on block right away that when you had any kind of a moon up, you could watch guys walking on the beach plain as day. But as soon as somebody walked into the shadow, either on purpose or inadvertently, they disappeared from sight and you couldn't see them. So even if they were wearing like a yellow jacket, you just couldn't see them. So I started walking just in the shadows. All the bluffs on block throw shadows depending on ambient light. I just always walked in the shadows because why wouldn't you? Why, I just didn't like to tip my hand for anything. I don't think anyone really liked to tip their hand. It's whatever advantage you can have, you use it.
I understand that. I want to go back to the trophy tackle story. Can you tell us, like, how did that came about? Like, what made you try to make your own, I guess, version of it? And I understand you also lent your designs to Ron, who made a coastal or featherweight. I don't remember what the name was off the top of my head.
So you wanted to know?
Well, I want to kind of know the story behind the trophy tackle. I mean, you weren't a guy who, I mean, you loved your plugs so much. I'm surprised you didn't have all your plugs made, but obviously that would just require too much time and less fishing. No? I mean, right?
Well, the plugs, see, the plugs were, I didn't make any plugs that I could buy. If I could buy something and Donnie or Danny made it, or later Bobby, that was fine. Those guys are great, all great plug makers. I only made things that I couldn't find. Just like it's just an extension of loading the plugs. You can't buy the redfin to do what I wanted to do. I don't think I ever caught a fish on an unloaded redfin in my life. Maybe not, certainly not since I got a driver's license. But it was kind of a double-edged sword. I felt that the plugs that I needed weren't available to me, so I just tried to figure out why the plugs I was using weren't doing what I needed them to do, and just kind of filling in the blanks. That's all. As far as the trophy tackle, that was D more than anything. He was an older guy. He was retired. He wanted to stay busy, and he made a lot of plugs himself. He was a light tackle fisherman. So he's like, yeah, we'll just make some plugs. And basically that's all it was just a little more than an experiment. He had nothing but a full machine shop and all the time in the world, and he showed me how to use milling machines and drill presses and everything. So at a very young age. So I really kind of grew up with it. And I knew him for probably 15 years or 20 years maybe before he even decided to start the trophy tackle endeavor. But it was never really, nothing that was ever sold under trophy tackle was actually ever sold retail. It was just to a handful of friends because they were, the ones that I was using were catching pretty good. So they wanted them too. But every plug ever made, I would describe as nothing more than a prototype. Nothing was in the final stages. It was just, they were good plugs though.
Yeah. How did that bunker chamber work out on the needlefish? Were you happy with the results?
With the what?
There was a chamber for like a scent in one of the needlefish?
Oh yeah, that was, yes, there was a scent chamber. That was, at the time, had a couple of friends from Rhode Island, and those guys swore by cod liver oil on their plugs.
Oh God. That is not good for you if you try to ingest it. I'm just letting you know. Go ahead.
Well, no, so, I mean, these guys caught a lot of fish with their cod liver oil. And, of course, they gave me some, and I tried it. And I caught fish on it. But, boy, everything really stunk. When you everything in your bag took an odor on, and it was hard to get rid of. But, nevertheless, I had mentioned to Dee that guys in Rhode Island are big on the cod liver oil. So he goes, oh, well, put a scent chamber in, right? So he put it in, and he contacted all these companies because he had an aircraft lighting business his whole life. That was his career. Uh-huh. So he had a lot of connections, and he would just call these companies, and they would send him hundreds of this and hundreds of that as samples. And people sent him everything under the sun. So he was trying it this way and trying it that way, and he never painted probably a plug in his life with an air gun. They bought an air gun, and he was just keeping busy, just trying to stay out of the house and staying in the shop where he enjoyed being by himself. And he was very gracious with his machinery, and he showed me a lot over the years. So it was kind of, I'm not going to say it was a marketing thing. It was definitely a proven technique. How needed it was, that's another story. I'm not really all that convinced, to tell you the truth. I've seen some of the best fishermen I know who are chain smokers catching fish after fish with a cigarette in their hand and changing their rig deal or whatever. I mean, I just think they knew what they were doing, despite the fact that their lures smelled either good or bad.
Right, so they introduced the impediment to themselves, but they still managed to overcome it with their knowledge or their experience.
Yeah, some guys are just like what I call naturals, right? They just catch fish. They catch fish with a very minimal amount of tackle, but the minimal amount they have means they had less to have to learn how to use correctly.
Well, I have to ask you this, now that you bring that up. Who is, in your mind, the best fisherman you ever seen? I know this is subjective, and I don't think this is a fair question because you don't want to offend someone maybe. But, like, in your mind, like, what? Tell me, few guys, one guy. Who are, in your mind, those guys? Well,
so many. I've met so many
great
fishermen.
Right, that's why I asked that question like that.
So many. I could never pick one. I learned a lot from all of them, and I also learned a lot that I didn't agree from pretty much all of them. So it's like anything else. If someone is willing to share their beliefs with you, you take their beliefs, but don't believe it as law. Take their beliefs as a foundation and then decide whether that is a good idea or not a good idea. Like, for instance, I met Jack Freck way before I was driving. He was certainly one of my mentors, and he would show me his belt, and he showed me all his plugs. He realized I had no idea what I was looking at, but I used his idea to design my own gaff holder. I tried his gaff holder. This is back when guys used gaffs.
Right.
And I didn't like it at all. But Jack Freck was a great fisherman. It worked for him. So that's why I think that people nowadays, they're always looking for a store-bought remedy or a remedy that worked great for their friend may not work for them. So you take everyone's idea and you just discard the ones that don't work for you, or build upon the ones that do. But anyway, as far as great fishermen, where would I even start? I was blessed enough to know many of the greatest fishermen in my lifetime. I mean,
that's
so
fair.
many.
That's fair. I understand that. Yeah. I mean, you definitely fished with many of them in the Block and Montauk and Cape Cod over the years.
Yes, I have. Yeah. I'm not going to say I haven't, but every spot has its own group of locals usually, but not always, that are they're better fishermen, so they just catch more. I mean, people like, Detsko and Nat Piazza, Mike DeSimeone from the Cape, and there's a bunch of guys from the Cape, and Charlie Dodge from Block. I mean, these guys will outfish anyone in these spots. I don't care how much tackle you had or how pretty the paint is. These guys, they didn't need that stuff. They knew what they were doing, and they could catch fish on anything. So they were natural. So
I find that very much that in every place that I ever fished in my life, I don't care if it was Mexico or Block or Cuttyhunk or Montauk, that the locals will outfish regulars or anyone else. I'm not going to say what odds are, but they don't seem to need all the stuff. They just seem to have it naturally. And that's probably just an extension of being a local, no? And knowing your area.
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what it is. I had my plugs in multiple loads. They didn't need the multiple loads. They knew exactly what to use, where to use it, and when to use it. When you have a lot of tackle, like I had a lot of tackle, I consider the tackle was a crutch. I didn't want to not have a tutti frutti, whatever, when you had one if you were catching fish. But over the years, I realized it's often not the plug. It's the way that the plug is rigged that's the difference. And sometimes it is the color. Like if you didn't have fluorescent green on Block, you were not going to have that many fish compared to a lot of people who did. But quite often it's the rigging. And my personal thing is, as you know, I'm a fanatic with split rings. I have a lot of theories on split rings, and I'm generally not a fan of them. But I feel that, like, I could take every single plug, and to me, I divide it. It's only into two categories. So I try to, granted, there's certain plugs that don't fit into either category, but for the most part, I try to make things really simple for myself. The simple thing, keep it simple. So to me, there's only two kinds of plugs. When you have a plug, a swimming plug, when you have a plug like a metal lip that's a consistent radius, it's a round plug, the swim is going to be from front to back, kind of like a darter. It's going to zig and zag. It's going to roll depending on how it's weighted, but the predominant action is going to be a front to back wiggle. When you have any plug that's any kind of a Rebel or a Redfin or any minnow plug, you'll notice that the dimension from the belly to the back is more than across the back. Those plugs will pivot from top to bottom more than front to back. And you'll also notice that all those minnow plugs have split rings, and most metal lips don't. Because if you take that redfin with the split rings on the hooks and make one cast with it, just look at the way it swims. Take those split rings off and put the hooks directly onto the links, and then make a cast. You'll see the action is totally changed. And that's just kind of what I'm getting at as far as the split rings. When metal lips, like a lot of people say, they don't like split rings on metal lips. This is why I believe they don't like split rings on metal lips. For me, when you have a hook that's going, let's say, right onto your swivel or right onto your tail wire on the plug, when the plug is swimming, the hooks are ballast, and the momentum of the swimming gets exaggerated by the hooks being thrown from side to side as they pivot on the swivel or tail wire. When you have split rings, I call split rings action isolators. They will isolate the action. If you look at any Rebel or Redfin, and just, you don't even have to cast it, you just have to move it 3 feet in front of you, you'll see that action of the plug flutter from top to bottom, just like I said before, but the hooks are basically motionless. The hooks are isolated. All the movement is between the link on the Redfin and the split ring, and on the other end, between the split ring and the hook. So it's not, the action is not getting telegraphed from the body to the hook. On the other hand, if you do the same thing with a metal lip, you'll see those hooks are going crazy when the plug is swimming. The hooks are flailing under the water from the side because I don't know what the correct term is, the inertia is not being interrupted by that split ring that's between the body of the plug and the hook. So I know it sounds ridiculous and confusing because people say, oh, I caught fish on it, this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, everything works. Everything works.
So the swivel, what you're saying is that the hook actually swings more without a split ring on a metal lip being in the same direction back and forth. It actually exaggerates the motion.
It's exaggerating the motion. It's like taking your keychain and holding one key in your hand and just swinging the bulk of the keys on. It's going to swing around. It's kind of, I know it makes sense to me because I know what I'm trying to explain.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I've seen it before. I've seen it on a metal lip, the way that the hook swings. So it actually exacerbates the motion of the plug by hook swinging.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of it. That's part of the equation. And when you change any character in an equation, it changes the end result. And that getting back to the being tied direct aspect of things, that's what I think it is more so than anything else. And I'll see people with split rings and not split rings, and it doesn't seem to be any rhyme nor reason as to why they have it. They're afraid that the builder or manufacturer put it on. There must be a reason. Well, I'm not saying there wasn't a reason, but maybe that reason doesn't apply to the circumstances that you're using them in. Maybe you're cheating yourself. Maybe you're shorting yourself.
Well, that's true. I mean, you did say that you never caught a fish on a regular redfin after you were 12, which I find it stunning as a statement. The one that hasn't been modified in some way, shape, or form is what you said, right?
I just didn't fish them unmodified.
Right. Well, obviously, right. I mean, it's not like they don't work unmodified. It's just stunning admission that you would just, not admission, but the statement that you would actually modify them to such extent that you didn't even care for the unweighted version is what you're saying. Because if you did, you would use them, right?
Correct. The unweighted version, I'm not saying the unweighted version probably was superior in certain circumstances, but like I said, I try to divide everything to so it's 51% better the way I'm doing it.
Right. They didn't apply to the places or situations that you were fishing in. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Let me ask you something before I forget. The swivels, there was a certain time when you were credited to some extent with having extra size or extra big swivels in a certain super strike plugs. Is this like old wives' tales, or there's something actually to it?
No, it's the truth.
Steve, some of the stuff that I attributed to you are like above and beyond what, not saying what happened, but sometimes you can't know exactly the story behind it. So I'd love to hear this.
Well, what happened was Donnie was making the needlefish. Well, it was first made in wood, and it's widely known the first wood needlefish he made only had 60-pound swivels. I mean, that's not going to hold you too well. But when Donnie did decide to go to the plastic and he showed me the swivels, I says, I don't want those swivels. I think they were, I don't know what size they were. I think they were 175 pounds, but I could very easily be wrong on that. But whatever size they were, I said, I want the next size bigger swivels. Donnie was very nice to make them for me. And at the time, I think he had 10 gluing clamps, and that he would put the two halves of the needlefish in and clamp them in. Well, whatever time was needed for the smaller swivels would not work for the bigger swivels. So he had to leave them clamped in overnight. So that means the most he could make me was like the last 10 lures of the day for him one night. would be mine, and then he would leave them until the following day. So my orders were slow, but as far as I know, I'm the only one that had those bigger swivels in there.
Yeah, that makes sense that he would leave them overnight. And speaking of needlefish, I mean, this was a huge part of the surf casting history, and not because it's the greatest lure ever made, but in some ways it's one of the rare lure that was actually kind of invented in our generation. Nothing was invented. Okay, I'm not going to go there, but it was in its current form came alive during those Block Island years. Correct? What was your experience with needlefish? Like, give me an idea how you came to be such a big fan of needlefish. Like, where did you start? Where did you see first one, and what it meant for you during your fishing years?
Well, in the fishermen, I think it was still the Long Island fishermen back then, not sure, but there was an ad for some needlefish. They were classic needlefish. They were 3 for $10, I think. And I said I was just going to buy some, and they were only available in 3 colors. I think I bought $20 worth of them. And I told my friend Marty, I says, I'm going to buy some of these. And he looked at it, and he bought some too. And anyway, I was in the Cape, and I was just leaving the Cape. I was saying goodbye to Mike DeSimeone and Tony Sharappo, the owners of Bass Run, at different times. And as I was leaving, the UPS truck stopped in front of Bass Run. So my truck was already running, but I turned it off and I went back in. So they said, "Oh, it's a package from Donnie." So inside the package was some wood 3-hook needlefish, the ones with the 60-pound swivels. But this is new. I didn't own any, and I just grabbed 3 of them. I grabbed 3 of them just for the heck of it. Although those guys always gave me, good breaks on everything, I knew that I had no expectation to use them. I just bought them because I was a plug junkie. So I figured I could get more from Donnie over the winter. So I just grabbed them. Now I had my classic needlefish and my Donnie needlefish. I then went to Block Island, and the fish were on needlefish, and I couldn't believe that that's what I was using. So the classics got destroyed. I mean, as fast as you could tie them on, the fish would just pull the screw eyes out. So I only had the 3 Donnie needlefish to use, and they were quite effective. And the island was filled with fish and no needlefish. So Donnie was nice enough to mail me some. I called him up, desperate, and he sent them up the next day. So my friends and I were lucky enough to have needlefish, but guys were using pieces of wood dowel. They were wrapping lead solder around boom needles. They were doing whatever they could do. There were no needlefish to be had. The only needlefish that existed were just whatever was on the island. It's not like you were going to go and buy a needlefish somewhere and bring it there that I know of.